My little brother destroyed my wedding dress with scissors an hour before the ceremony, and he's my hero for life. My 12-year-old brother Nathan burst through the bridal suite door carrying fabric scissors and started slashing my $4,000 wedding dress to pieces. The beating scattered across the floor while my bridesmaids screamed and my mom lunged for the scissors. My dress hung in tatters, silk torn beyond repair, with pieces of lace floating down like snow while Nathan stood there breathing hard, still gripping the scissors. "Nathan, what have you done?" I whispered, staring at the ruins of the dress I'd spent 8 months saving for. The ceremony was in 3 hours with 200 guests already arriving at the venue. My maid of honor Chelsea was crying about how we'd never find another dress in time, while my mom shook Nathan by the shoulders, demanding to know what was wrong with him. The wedding planner burst in after hearing the commotion and went pale when she saw the destroyed gown, immediately pulling out her phone to call every bridal shop in a 50-mile radius. My future mother-in-law called David in a panic while my sister Melissa held up pieces of torn silk, trying to see if anything could be salvaged. Nathan looked me straight in the eyes with deadly seriousness and said, "I found something on David's phone last night that you need to see before you marry him." My heart stopped because David was supposed to be perfect for me, my college sweetheart who everyone said was made for me. Nathan pulled out his phone with shaking hands and showed me screenshots that made the room spin around me. The images showed conversations between David and his ex-girlfriend Rachel from just 3 days ago, where he was telling her he wasn't sure about marrying me and wanted to see her one more time before the wedding. There were texts where he said I was safe and stable, but Rachel was his real passion, and he didn't know if he could go through with vows he wasn't sure he meant. The timestamp showed these messages were sent while I was at my bachelorette party last weekend, but that wasn't the worst part, Nathan said, scrolling to more screenshots. David had been planning to meet Rachel tonight after our reception at the hotel, where we were supposed to spend our wedding night. He'd booked a separate room under his friend's name, and told Rachel he needed to know if they still had a connection before it was too late. The messages included detailed plans about how to sneak away from our own wedding celebration. My mom grabbed Nathan's phone to see for herself while my bridesmaids gathered around, reading over her shoulder. The evidence was unmistakable, with David's contact photo and phone number clearly visible in the screenshots. Chelsea started crying when she read the part where David told Rachel that marrying me felt like giving up on his dreams. The final message was from this morning, sent while I was getting my makeup done, where David told Rachel he was going through with the ceremony because it was too late to back out. "How did you even see these?" I asked Nathan, my voice barely a whisper. He explained that David had left his phone charging in our living room last night while he went to pick up his tuxedo, and the messages kept popping up on the lock screen. Nathan had taken screenshots because he knew no one would believe him without proof, especially since everyone thought David was so perfect. My wedding planner was frantically calling bridal shops, but I told her to hang up because there wasn't going to be a wedding. My mom started crying, saying maybe it was just cold feet, but I knew what I was looking at. The man I was supposed to marry in 2 hours had been planning to cheat on me on our wedding night with the woman he really loved. Nathan grabbed my hands and said he'd rather ruin my dress than let me ruin my entire life by marrying someone who didn't really want me. He'd stayed awake all night trying to figure out how to tell me, knowing everyone would think he was just a jealous kid causing trouble. Destroying the dress was the only way he could think of to stop the wedding without having to explain everything in front of the whole family. My phone started buzzing with calls from David, probably wondering why vendors were calling about changes. Chelsea answered on speaker so everyone could hear. "Where are you?" David asked, his voice tight with what I now recognized as guilt rather than pre-wedding nerves. "The photographer is asking when you'll be ready for pictures." Chelsea told him there was a serious problem and he needed to come immediately. David arrived 10 minutes later, still in jeans and a t-shirt, looking confused. He saw the destroyed dress and his face went through shock, confusion, then something that looked almost like relief. "What happened?" he asked, but his voice sounded hollow. Nathan stepped forward, holding up his phone with the screenshots displayed clearly. David's face went completely white as he realized what we'd found. For a long moment, nobody spoke while David stared at the evidence of his betrayal. "I can explain," David started, but I held up my hand to stop him. There was nothing to explain because the messages spoke for themselves. He'd been planning to marry me while arranging to meet his ex-girlfriend the same night. But then David's phone started buzzing with incoming messages, and Nathan grabbed it before David could stop him. The new messages were from Rachel, asking if he was really going through with the wedding and reminding him about their midnight meeting. She wrote that she'd been thinking about him all morning and couldn't wait to be in his arms again tonight. David's face went from denial to panic as Nathan read Rachel's messages out loud for everyone to hear. The messages revealed that this wasn't just emotional cheating, but that Rachel was already at the Marriott waiting for him, having driven 4 hours from her city specifically for their planned rendezvous. She'd written about the lingerie she'd bought for tonight and how she'd never stopped loving him, even during the years they'd been apart. The final message made my stomach turn. "I can't believe you're actually going to marry her when you know we belong together." My grandmother, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner taking everything in, suddenly stood up and walked over to David. At 78 years old and barely 5 feet tall, she looked him straight in the eye and said, "You are a coward and a liar, and my granddaughter deserves so much better than you." Then she turned to Nathan and hugged him, telling him he was the bravest young man she'd ever known. David finally stopped trying to explain and just broke down, admitting that he'd been confused for months but didn't know how to call off the wedding without hurting everyone. He said he loved me but wasn't in love with me, and seeing Rachel again at his bachelor party last month had made him realize he'd never gotten over her. The bachelor party I wasn't supposed to worry about because it was just innocent fun with the guys. My dad, who'd arrived after getting a frantic call from my mom, finally exploded. "You had months to figure this out before today," he yelled. "You let us spend $40,000 on this wedding, you let my daughter plan her entire future around you, and you were planning to cheat on her tonight." 2 of my uncles had to hold him back when he lunged toward David. David's mother started crying, apologizing to my family and saying she'd had no idea her son was capable of this kind of deception. His father just stood there looking mortified, occasionally muttering about the shame David had brought on their family name. David's best man, Trevor, arrived just in time to witness the complete meltdown and immediately started texting the other groomsmen to stay away from the venue. The venue coordinator called my mom to check on our timeline, and my mom had to explain that we needed to cancel everything immediately. The coordinator was surprisingly understanding, saying she'd seen this happen before and would would work with us on vendor cancellations and refunds. The caterer agreed to donate the food to a local homeless shelter, and the florist said we could keep the arrangements since they were already assembled. Nathan sat beside me on the couch in the bridal suite, still holding the scissors that had destroyed my dress and saved my future. He looked scared that I might be angry with him for causing such chaos, but I wrapped my arms around him and told him he was the bravest person I knew. He'd risked everyone being mad at him to protect me from a marriage that would have been built on lies from the very first day. David finally left after trying one more time to convince me we could postpone the wedding and work things out in counseling, but I knew there was no coming back from this level of betrayal. He'd been planning to cheat on me on our wedding night, which meant he'd never really been committed to our marriage in the first place. As he walked out, he actually had the nerve to ask if I was going to keep the engagement ring. The hardest part was calling my grandmother's sister, who'd flown in from Arizona and was already getting ready at the hotel. She listened quietly while I explained what Nathan had discovered, then said she was proud of me for being strong enough to call it off. She'd rather see me single and happy than married and miserable to someone who didn't deserve me, just like she'd told her own daughter 40 years ago. My bridesmaids helped me out of my wedding lingerie and into regular clothes while we figured out what to do with 200 guests who were expecting a celebration. We decided to go to the venue anyway and turn it into a family gathering where we could thank everyone for coming and explain briefly that the wedding was off due to David's unfaithfulness. Nathan rode with me to the venue, still worried that he'd done the wrong thing by destroying my dress so dramatically, instead of just showing me the messages quietly. I told him he'd saved me years of heartbreak and probably a messy divorce down the road. Finding out about David's plan before the wedding was a gift, even if it didn't feel like one right then. At the venue, my dad stood up in front of all 200 guests and announced that the wedding was canceled due to the groom's unfaithfulness. Without going into specific details out of respect for both families, some people gasped, others nodded like they'd seen this coming, and a few guests actually started clapping when they realized I'd dodged a bullet. David's family left immediately, looking mortified, while my family and friends rallied around me. The DJ switched from wedding music to just background music, and people started treating it like an impromptu party celebrating my freedom rather than mourning my canceled wedding. My cousin Bradley gave a toast about how I deserved better, and several people told me they'd never thought David was good enough for me anyway. The photographer, who we'd already paid in full, offered to do a family portrait session instead of wedding photos. We took pictures of me with Nathan, both of us laughing despite everything that had happened. Those photos ended up being some of my favorites because they captured the moment my little brother saved my life by having the courage to destroy something beautiful on the surface. Later that evening, I checked David's social media and saw that Rachel had posted a cryptic message about second chances and following your heart. Within a week, they were officially back together, confirming that Nathan's instincts had been absolutely right. David had been planning to use our wedding as a way to secure his backup plan while pursuing what he really wanted all along. But the aftermath wasn't as simple as just moving on. 3 days after the canceled wedding, David's mother called me crying, begging me to reconsider and give her son another chance. She insisted that Rachel had manipulated him and that he really did love me. She offered to pay for couples counseling and even suggested postponing the wedding for 6 months to give us time to work things out. I had to explain to her that there was no working out someone who'd planned to cheat on me on our wedding night. David hadn't made a mistake in the heat of the moment. He'd been systematically planning to betray me while going through all the motions of our wedding preparations. He'd sat through cake tastings and venue tours while texting his ex-girlfriend about their secret rendezvous. Nathan overheard the phone call and came to sit next to me while his mother pleaded with me. He whispered that David's mom was doing exactly what everyone had been doing for months, making excuses for David's behavior instead of holding him accountable. My 12-year-old brother had more moral clarity than most of the adults in our lives. The next week was a blur of returning wedding gifts and canceling vendors. The worst part was dealing with people who thought I was overreacting and should have given David a chance to explain. My own aunt suggested that maybe I was being too harsh and that all men get cold feet before marriage. She actually said that Rachel probably meant nothing to him and I should focus on the future rather than dwelling on a few text messages. I had to show her the screenshots Nathan had taken, including the ones where David detailed exactly how he planned to sneak away from our reception. She went quiet after reading about the hotel room he'd booked and the lies he'd prepared to tell me about where he was going. Even then, she suggested that maybe David was just confused and needed guidance rather than punishment. Nathan started having nightmares about the wedding that never happened. He'd wake up crying, worried that he'd ruined my life by destroying my dress. I found him one night sitting on his bedroom floor, cutting up pieces of paper with the same scissors he'd used on my dress, trying to understand why he'd felt compelled to do something so drastic. We started seeing a family therapist named Dr. Sarah Chen, who specialized in helping families process traumatic events. She explained that Nathan had been carrying an enormous burden for a 12-year-old, knowing something that could destroy his sister's happiness. He'd acted on pure protective instinct, choosing to be the bad guy rather than let me marry someone who was planning to betray me. Dr. Chen helped us understand that Nathan's dramatic action had been necessary because subtle approaches wouldn't have worked. If he'd just shown me the messages quietly, David could have explained them away or convinced me they were taken out of context. By destroying the dress and forcing a public confrontation, Nathan had made it impossible for anyone to minimize or dismiss the evidence. 3 months later, I moved to Portland for a marketing position I'd turned down because David hadn't wanted to relocate. Nathan helped me pack my entire life into boxes, and we laughed about how destroying my wedding dress had actually freed me to chase my own dreams instead of compromising for someone who wasn't worth it. The job was everything I'd hoped for and more. My new boss, Jennifer Walsh, was a woman who'd built her own company from nothing and became a mentor to me. She understood what I'd been through because she'd divorced her own cheating ex-husband years earlier. She told me that the best revenge was living well and building a life that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or commitment. 6 months after the canceled wedding, Nathan started high school and wrote an essay about making difficult decisions to protect people you love. His English teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, called it one of the most mature pieces she'd ever read from a student his age. She said Nathan had captured something important about moral courage and the difference between doing what's easy and doing what's right. The essay got entered into a statewide writing competition, and Nathan won second place. At the award ceremony, Finally, he dedicated his prize to his sister, who'd taught him that sometimes you have to break something beautiful to reveal the truth underneath. I cried during his speech because I realized he'd learned something profound about integrity that many adults never understand. I framed a picture of my destroyed wedding dress and hung it in my new apartment as a reminder that sometimes the worst things that happen to us turn out to be blessings in disguise. Nathan's quick thinking and courage had saved me from marrying someone who was already planning to betray me before we even said our vows. David and Rachel got engaged 6 months later, which just confirmed that I'd been right to trust Nathan's evidence over David's desperate explanations. My little brother had seen through David's perfect facade and loved me enough to risk everything to save me from a lifetime of being someone's second choice. Their engagement announcement on social media was accompanied by a long post about how they'd never stopped loving each other and had finally found their way back together. Reading it made me sick because it confirmed that David had been emotionally involved with Rachel throughout our entire relationship. I hadn't been his backup plan, I'd been his placeholder while he figured out how to get back with the woman he really wanted. Nathan saw the announcement too and immediately called me, worried that I'd be upset. Instead, I felt nothing but gratitude because his courage had saved me from a marriage that would have been built on lies. David and Rachel deserved each other, and I deserved so much better than someone who would plan to cheat on me on our wedding night. 2 years later, Nathan was my date to my cousin's wedding, and we laughed about how different that celebration felt when everyone involved actually wanted to be there. He'd grown 4 inches and his voice had deepened, but he still had the same protective instincts that had saved me from the biggest mistake of my life. I met someone new eventually, a pediatric nurse named Alex who worked at the children's hospital downtown. We met at a coffee shop near my office, and he immediately caught my attention because he was reading to a little girl while her mother filled out paperwork. The way he made her laugh despite being in a medical setting showed me the kind of person he was. Alex never made me wonder if I was his first choice or his backup plan. When Nathan met him 6 months into our relationship, he approved immediately, saying Alex looked at me the way David never had. My little brother had become my most trusted advisor about relationships because he'd proven he could see through lies when I couldn't. On our first anniversary, Alex planned a surprise picnic in the park where we'd had our first official date. He'd remembered that I'd mentioned loving sunflowers, and he'd somehow managed to find a field of them in bloom despite it being October. As we sat surrounded by flowers, he told me he'd never met anyone who'd survived what I had and come out stronger. Nathan joined us for dinner that night, and Alex asked him directly what he thought about our relationship. Nathan looked at Alex seriously and said he could tell Alex really loved me because he never tried to change me or make me doubt myself. He said David had always made me smaller, but Alex made me bigger and brighter. Coming from a teenager, it was the most insightful relationship advice I'd ever heard. 3 years after my canceled wedding, Nathan walked me down the aisle because our dad was deployed overseas with the Navy. Nathan looked so proud in his tuxedo, knowing he'd helped me find my way to someone who actually deserved me. This time, there were no secret messages or backup plans, just 2 people who genuinely wanted to build a life together. The night before my real wedding, Nathan gave me a small wrapped box. Inside were the fabric scissors he'd used to destroy my first dress, polished and engraved with the date he'd saved my life. The card said, "For protecting your heart when you couldn't see clearly enough to protect it yourself." I cried reading it because it perfectly captured what he'd done for me. Alex understands the significance of those scissors and why they sit in a place of honor on our mantle. Nathan's courage to destroy something beautiful on the surface to reveal the ugly truth underneath had changed the entire trajectory of my life. Sometimes love means making hard choices that look wrong from the outside, but are absolutely right for the people you're trying to protect. Looking back, I realized Nathan must have been carrying the weight of that knowledge for hours before he finally acted. He'd tried to figure out a gentler way to tell me, but realized that nothing short of stopping the wedding would make me listen. His dramatic gesture forced everyone to pay attention to evidence that might otherwise have been dismissed as teenage jealousy or misunderstanding. Dr. Chen later told us that Nathan had displayed what psychologists call moral courage, the willingness to take action to protect others even when it means personal risk or social disapproval. She said most adults struggle with this kind of decision-making, but Nathan had acted on pure protective instinct without calculating the personal cost. 5 years after that terrible morning when Nathan destroyed my dress, our family had found a new normal built on honest communication and protective love. We'd learned that sometimes the people who love us most have to make the hardest choices to save us from ourselves. Nathan had risked our relationship to preserve my future, and that kind of selfless courage deserved to be celebrated rather than forgotten. Thanks for hanging out with me and wondering through all those moments. Definitely been a fun little journey asking questions together. I'll catch you around next time. Like the video. It helps more than you think.